The afternoon at the hospital had been like any other monitoring vitals, checking charts, adjusting medication dosages. I was in the pediatric wing, standing outside Tyler's room while he tried to show me how fast he could build a Lego tower, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Normally, I let calls go unanswered during shifts, but the number flashing on the screen was local, and something in me decided to pick up. "This is Sable Whitaker," I said softly, stepping into the hallway. A crisp male voice introduced himself as Craig Donovan from Cascadia Bank. His tone was calm, almost indifferent, as if he were discussing a minor billing error. "I'm calling regarding your delinquent mortgage payments. You're 90 days behind on the loan for Highland Drive. The balance owed is $600,000. For a second, my mind went blank. "I don't have a mortgage," I replied, pressing my back against the wall. He insisted their records showed otherwise and asked me to confirm the last 4 digits of my social security number. I hesitated, then gave them. He read them back, perfectly correct. Then came the rest, a listed income nearly double my actual salary, and a credit score in the high 700s. It wasn't mine, it couldn't be. I clutched the phone tighter, my breath shallow. Highland Drive. The name struck a familiar note. It was in Queen Anne, just below Cary Park, the hill where tourists lined up for sunset photos. My father had been boasting about a forever view not long ago, joking that I should be ready for barbecues once he finished settling in. I ended the call mechanically, but my hands trembled as I returned to Tyler's room, unable to shake the thought that somehow, impossibly, my name was already written on that house. My apartment in Ballard wasn't much by most standards. 1 bedroom above a coffee shop, a mailbox secured with a padlock I bought after a neighbor's mail was stolen, and shelves that sagged under the weight of too many plants. Still, it was mine. I paid rent on time, brewed cheap coffee in the mornings, and on days off took the ferry to Bainbridge to walk the wooded trails alone. My life was modest, predictable, even quiet. But it was honest. My father's life had once been anything but quiet. For decades, Dorian Whitaker's name had been on the signs outside half-framed houses scattered across King County. He specialized in craftsman restorations homes with broad porches and sturdy beams that seemed to promise permanence. When I was little, he'd take me to job sites, letting me hammer scrapwood while he shouted instructions to his crew. Back then, he was admired, the kind of man people trusted with their biggest investment. But markets shift. A slowdown after the crash and a disastrous partnership hollowed out his business. I watched pride turn brittle as contracts dwindled and debts stacked higher. He bristled at the idea that he was finished, refusing to be spoken of in the past tense. At family dinners in my parents' Finney Ridge home, he masked frustration with humor. He'd carve the roast and laugh about using every tool in the box to stay ahead. More than once, he called me his responsible one, praising my steady job while half joking that I ought to let him peek at my pay stubs for a trade line check. I'd laughed nervously, not realizing at the time that jokes can be blueprints. The memory unsettled me now. He was the man who taught me how to sign my name with care, pressing the pen firmly so it couldn't be lifted or altered. And yet, the bank's voice still echoed in my ear, telling me my signature had appeared where I'd never placed it. I could no longer ignore the faint crack running through the table we all gathered around, a crack that seemed to widen each time I thought of Highland Drive. 2 mornings later, I walked into Cascadia Bank's downtown branch, my palms damp against the folder I carried, though it was nearly empty. A manager named Richard Peterson led me to a glass-walled office. He slid a heavy file across the desk, each page protected in plastic sleeves as though preserving evidence from a crime scene. "Here is the application," he said, his finger tapping the header. My name sat bold across the top, followed by a salary nearly double what I actually earned. There was my social security number, my birth date, even my employer's information all correct, but weaponized. Next came income verifications. Pay stubs I never provided, and closing disclosures stamped with a notary seal. The notary's name was real. I recognized it from other county documents. The deed of trust listed a recorded instrument number that Peterson said I could trace at the King County Recorder's office. The paper felt heavy, official, unassailable, except it wasn't my hand. The signature curved across line after line, convincingly mine at first glance. I stared long enough to feel sick, every muscle tightening as if bracing against an earthquake. My father had taught me to press hard when signing, so no one could lift my name. Whoever forged this knew that too. "Can I get certified copies of all of this?" I asked. My voice sounded thin but steady. "Of course," Peterson said, sliding a request form toward me. He lowered his voice. "If you're telling me you didn't sign these, you should contact the Federal Trade Commission and law enforcement. This isn't just a clerical mistake. By the time I stepped out into the drizzle of 2nd Avenue, I had already placed a fraud alert with Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, filed an affidavit through the FTC's identity theft portal, and scheduled an appointment with the Seattle Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. The ink on those pages was crisp, the seals authentic, but every stroke told a lie. And as I folded the copies into my bag, I knew the next step was no longer optional. I had to bring this into the light. Detective Rowan Hale met me in a cramped office at the Financial Crimes Unit, a stack of files already waiting on the desk. He was direct, speaking in a steady cadence that left little room for wishful thinking. The mortgage application was submitted from a fixed IP address in Georgetown, he said, turning the monitor toward me. "That location matches your father's workshop." I stared at the screen, the highlighted numbers blurring. Georgetown, where the sawdust smell clung to every rafter, where I'd once swept floors as a child to earn ice cream money. I didn't need confirmation, but here it was. Rowan flipped to the next file. "The title searches show the property closed unusually fast, under 3 weeks. There's also a scheduled cash-out refinance, same property, same borrower's name, yours. If it had gone through, another $200,000 would have been drawn." He paused, tapping the margin. "And there are liens filed by contractors. Unpaid bills stacking up." The picture sharpened into something uglier. This wasn't a panicked mistake. It was layered, planned pride demanding a Queen Anne view, desperation borrowing my future to hold it up. And beneath it all, Lena's glossy staging business, a showroom masquerading as a home. That night, my mother called, her voice low as if the walls might listen. "Sable, don't go to the police yet. Your father, he's proud, but he's not a criminal. Let us talk first. If this goes public, it'll ruin him." I almost laughed at the word ruin, as though my shredded credit and forged name weren't already debris. But I kept my tone even. "Mom, the bank, the recorder's office, the police they already know. It's bigger than us now." Silence stretched, broken only by her quiet plea. "Just remember, families fix their own walls before letting strangers in." I hung up, but her words lingered. My father had always insisted that signatures were as solid as beams, that a house built straight would never sag. Yet here I was, standing under the weight of a roof I hadn't raised, wondering how long I could carry it before the structure collapsed entirely. The next step was no longer about discovery, it was about confrontation. The days that followed blurred into paperwork and long hours bent over my dining table. I drafted letters to each bureau confirming the fraud alerts, submitted dispute forms to Cascadia Bank's risk team, and swore out an affidavit of non-participation. Each envelope felt heavier than its contents, as if sealing them shut was nailing boards across a door I could never open again. I went to a notary in Fremont to sign the sworn statement. The woman glanced over the document, asked for my license, and then watched as I signed my name. I pressed the pen hard into the paper, the way my father once taught me. I heard his voice in memory. "If you press deep enough, no one can lift it. A true line can't be faked." The irony made my chest tighten. He had shown me how to make a signature strong, then used that knowledge to forge mine. Turning him in wasn't like turning in a stranger. It carried the weight of our entire history. Still, history didn't erase debt, and debt in my name would bury me alive. At the suggestion of Detective Hale, I contacted Tess Morey, a title officer with a reputation for precision. She met me at her office near the county courthouse, pulling up the recorded deed and deed of trust. The pages looked no different from the copies I already had, except Tess highlighted the margin notes like a professor dissecting a text. "There," she said, pointing. "Every instrument has a preparer's phone number. Most people don't notice. This one, it's your father's cell. He's listed himself as the contact for title corrections." My stomach dropped. It was the kind of mistake you only made if you believed you'd never be caught. "Keep this page flagged," Tess advised, handing me a red marker. "Courts like undeniable links. This is one." I walked back to my car, the annotated deed in my hands like a splintered beam. Every line I drew between fraud and family was becoming clearer, sharper, unavoidable. The law measured angles that didn't bend for blood. That night, I filed the new evidence with Hale, attaching scans of Tess's notes. I stared at the confirmation email long after I hit send, the glow of the screen casting hard shadows across the apartment walls. The case was moving forward, and so was I. The only path left was the one that led to my father's table. Detective Hale called me back to the precinct 3 days later. His desk held a different kind of evidence, this time a folder of printed emails, drafts, and spreadsheets pulled from a seized laptop. He slid one page across to me without a word. It was a bankruptcy petition already filled in with my name, social security number, and employment information. Attached were pre-written hardship letters, pleading my case as though I had authored them myself. "This wasn't panic," Hale said, leaning back. "This was planned. Your father was preparing to walk you straight into bankruptcy court. He'd strip what he could from the refinance, then leave you holding the wreckage." The room seemed to tilt. I had convinced myself, in weaker moments, that desperation had pushed him into a corner. But this was design. Architecture built with my identity as the frame. By the time I left the precinct, my mind was already on the next step. Talking privately would only bury the truth again, smoothed over with charm and excuses. No, if this was going to be confronted, it needed witnesses and daylight. Our next Sunday dinner in Finney Ridge would be the place. I printed the police report, flagged the recorder numbers, and bound the pages together into a packet. Sliding the stack into my bag felt like placing a stone there, heavy but necessary. That evening, my phone buzzed with a call from my mother. Iris's voice trembled. "Please, Sable, let us handle this at home. If you go through with this, it'll destroy him." "It already has," I said softly. Minutes later, another message arrived from Lena, a text about family optics, about not airing what could be handled within the walls of kin. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. To them, my credit, my name, my future were planks in a deck they could stand on, joists hidden beneath their feet. I would not be hidden anymore. When Sunday came, I walked up the steps of the house I had grown up in, the packet pressed flat in my bag, ready to lay bare what could no longer stay buried. The smell of salmon and roasted potatoes drifted through the house. So ordinary it almost disguised the weight of what I carried. We gathered around the maple table that had hosted every birthday and holiday of my childhood. Conversation hummed low, Lena bragging about a new staging project, my mother fussing over portion sizes, my father pouring himself a glass of red wine. I didn't speak until plates were half empty. Then I reached into my bag, drew out the bound packet, and slid it across the table. The sound of paper against wood was louder than the clink of silverware. My father's fork slipped from his hand, striking porcelain. Everyone froze. "What's this?" he asked, though his eyes betrayed recognition. "Police report," I said evenly. "Identity theft, mortgage fraud, bankruptcy papers you wrote in my name." Color rose in his face. "I meant to refinance it properly. You're resilient, Sable. You owe the family a win after everything I built." I felt my hands steady. "What you built was a crime scene. You forged my signature, drained my credit, and tried to bankrupt me to save yourself." My mother pressed her napkin to her lips, whispering, "Dorian, please tell me this isn't true." Lena cut in sharply. "This doesn't belong at a dinner table. Families handle things privately. Families don't steal from each other," I said, my voice hard enough to still the room. At that moment, my phone lit up on the table. Detective Hale's name across the screen. I answered on speaker. His voice carried through the silence. "We're moving forward with charges." The words settled like dust after demolition. My mother's eyes filled, torn between disbelief and grief. My father gripped the arms of his chair, jaw tight, as if holding back collapse. I ended the call and closed the folder, the lines between us carved as sharp as the knife still resting by my plate. The air in the dining room felt different now, as though the walls themselves had shifted, and I knew nothing in this house would return to what it had been. After that dinner, my father shoved his chair back and stormed out, muttering about ungrateful children as he slammed the door behind him. By the next morning, he was holed up in the Queen Anne house, as though squatting in the shell he had built with my stolen name. My mother, pale and trembling, packed a bag and drove across the bridge to her sister's place in West Seattle. The split in the family was no longer hidden. It gaped like a crack running the length of a foundation. News traveled quickly. Neighbors who had once admired my father's work now whispered when they saw me at the market. Word of lines surfaced contractors he had stiffed were filing claims in district court. Each petition another nail in the coffin of his reputation. Cascadia Bank moved swiftly, accelerating the note and scheduling foreclosure proceedings. The Queen Anne view that had cost me my credit was slipping from his hands even before the courts finished with him. A week later, I stood outside the Georgetown workshop as Seattle police officers carried out boxes of files and hard drives. The sight of the building stripped bare hit me harder than I expected. That shop had been my childhood playground, a place where I first swung a hammer under his watchful eye. Now it was reduced to evidence tags and seized property. Extended relatives began calling, their voices edged with accusation. "You could withdraw. Sable. He's your father. Don't ruin him." I listened, then repeated the words Hale had told me if I withdrew. The bank and the courts would assume my consent. Complicity would follow me, and as a licensed nurse, I could not afford the stain. Protecting him would mean destroying myself. Each choice I made felt like tearing another beam from the frame of the family story I'd grown up inside. Yet as the walls gave way, I knew it was the only path left if I wanted a life built on something true. And so I waited for the courts to open their doors, carrying the weight of what remained. The courtroom smelled faintly of dust and old wood polish, a place where lives were weighed and measured without ceremony. My father stood at the defendant's table, thinner than I remembered, his hands clasped in front of him as if restraint could undo what he had done. When the charges were read, identity theft, filing false financial statements, he nodded, the plea already agreed upon. He spoke only once, his voice low but clear. He admitted he had used my social security number, copied pay stubs I'd once handed him in trust, and filed documents without hesitation. "I assumed her consent," he said, glancing toward me. "Because family." The judge leaned forward, her gavel resting on the bench. "What you assumed was ownership, not consent. What you called family was entitlement, not love." Her words landed heavier than the sentence 18 months in state custody, restitution payments, and supervised release to follow. When the hearing ended, I walked out into the chill of spring rain. The legal consequences were his to carry now, but the practical pieces of my life still needed repair. Cascadia finally rescinded the debt from my file. The credit bureaus began scrubbing away derogatories, and King County recorded a reconveyance after foreclosure closed the door on Highland Drive. I returned to my work at the hospital, keeping my head down, pouring myself into the routine of caring for children whose battles dwarfed my own. Therapy sessions through the Employee Assistance Program helped me untangle the guilt and grief that lingered, though the edges still cut. Justice had written its line across the record. But the question that remained was one the courts could never settle: the distance between the name I carried and the one he had stolen. The answer, I knew, would come only in what I chose to build next. By summer, I signed closing papers at a small Ballard bungalow. The mortgage was modest, the interest rate fair, and for the first time in months, every document bore my signature alone. When the notary slid the deed across the desk, I pressed my pen firmly, the way I had been taught, but this time the line was mine by choice. The first thing I planted in the yard was a young dogwood. Its roots spread easily in the damp soil, and I liked knowing it would bloom each spring, white blossoms against the gray sky of Puget Sound. Each petal felt like proof that something fragile could also be resilient. My mother started counseling soon after, trying to separate her own grief from loyalty. Our conversations grew cautious but steadier, though contact with my father was limited to structured calls through his release plan. The distance felt necessary, like bracing a weakened beam so the rest of the frame wouldn't collapse. I began volunteering with a nonprofit that supported victims of identity theft. I sat across from people as shaken as I had been, walking them through freezes, affidavits, and recorder pulls. Each time I showed someone how to mark a fraudulent deed or lock down their credit, it felt like reclaiming ground I had lost. One evening, I carried the deed to my own home into the back room and slid it into a fireproof safe. My key ring now held just 3 keys: front door, mailbox, and storage shed. Light, honest, nothing hidden beneath someone else's name. I locked the safe, turned back to the garden, and watched the dogwood bend slightly in the breeze. It was a quiet beginning, but it was mine, rooted in soil no one could take.